High above the tilled plain, Evelyn balanced on a splintered ladder, both hands wrapped tight around a rusted blade that hadn't turned in 20 years. The old windmill groaned in protest as she loosened each bolt, dust spinning off in the midday wind. Down below, a curious crowd had gathered, neighbors leaning on tailgates and kids swinging bare feet from a fence rail, laughter drifting up with every creak of the old tower. "She's gonna fix that relic?" someone called, the words edging out over pockets of good-natured jeering. More than one pointed, trading bets on whether she'd fall or just give up. Evelyn ignored the voices, her jaw set and eyes scanning the tangled workings of the vane and weathered gears. No one could guess what she was thinking, or why she bothered at all with machinery the farm had long ago given up for dead. She paused, rubbing the ache from her wrist, the wide sky wheeling above and the familiar shape of failure at her feet. Whatever she saw in that battered windmill, she wasn't ready to tell. Not yet. The valley unfurled in broad, lazy folds, fields patched with alfalfa and early corn, dotted with black and white cows that moved like slow water through the grass. Red barns leaned into the hillsides, their doors yawning open at dawn to release the day's work, their roofs gently rusting beneath the fading gold of summer hedgerows of wild plum hugged the old fence lines, and every so often the glimmer of tin flashed through tall weeds, a memory of the machines that used to matter, abandoned where they broke, and the story ended. At the northern rise stood the windmill, a slender skeleton silhouetted against every rising and setting sun. For most locals, it was just scenery, a landmark on the way to better-kept spreads, its vanes stuck fast and frame rusted brown, arms forever stretched for a wind that didn't care. Around here, life moved to the pulse of chores and seasons, morning coffee at the feed store, tractors humming past on their way to fresh rows, children shelling beans on front steps, and grown men swapping the same yarns every Saturday. The hills echoed with the whistle of wind through thistle and grass, sometimes gentle, sometimes setting whole sections of wheat dancing like green fire. Forgotten things belonged to the land as surely as harvest dust or last year's hay. The carriage half buried by blackberries, the shell of an old combine sunken into a pond, the windmill steeped in so much silence, no one thought to mourn its losing fight. In this valley, most believed that what was left derelict had earned its rest, and no amount of mending or wishing could bring it back to work, or to wonder. Evelyn Martin was 45, broad-shouldered and sun-browned from decades spent coaxing life from reluctant ground. She'd inherited the farm after her mother's long illness, the last in a line who'd measured years by bushels stacked in storms remembered raised among stubborn men and practical women. She learned early to keep her head while others lost their tempers, and to hold on to small, quiet hopes in the face of hard seasons. The windmill held more than rust for Evelyn. It was the first thing she'd ever climbed, swinging up behind her grandfather as he explained how gears caught the wind and pumped water clear from the sandy well. She still remembered that thrill, higher than the barn roof. The valley sprawled like a secret, her grandfather's voice rising in the breeze. "The old things keep us honest when new ones break." Years on, she'd watch power bills creep higher, droughts cut into yields, and the grid fail one too many stormy nights. Her neighbors joked about fossil farming and left their relics to rot. But Evelyn found herself drawn, evening after evening, to the battered frame and its lost song. Sometimes she traced the initials her mother carved in the base. Sometimes she ran a hand over the corroded tail vane, longing for one more lesson from those who'd passed. The windmill was a dare and a memory, a bridge to everything she had loved and everything she was still stubborn enough to try, for all she needed was a little more patience and gust enough to give it life again. Lately, the troubles had stacked up in ways that couldn't be ignored. Summers brought electric bills swollen by pump failures and air conditioners run ragged just to keep the house cool enough for sleep. When the grid faltered in thunderstorms or under winter's icy weight, the barns went dark, and water for both cattle and crops was a gamble, drawn from hoses that sputtered half the time or froze solid by morning. Crop yields slipped lower, corners of fields browned before they should, and neighbors shrugged, blaming luck or the same string of bad years everyone seemed to share. The windmill itself had become a symbol of loss. Its gears had long ago seized, teeth fused by rust. The main tail rod buckled just enough to jam every turn. Half the wooden steps on its tower were cracked and half rotten, giving way in the wrong place with a splintery whine. Parts were missing entirely, blades warped by tornado winds 6 seasons back. A pump lever snapped and long since scavenged for scrap by someone desperate. More than once, Evelyn's uncle had pressed his case at Sunday supper. "It's never going to turn again. Let it go before you break your neck up there." Even those who wished her well couldn't hide their disbelief. For most, the windmill was best left to weather and time, another skeleton on a skyline full of old ghosts. Doubt grew thicker every week she kept trying, as if the barn's failures and the ruined mill belonged together, too broken to matter, too far gone to rescue. But where others turned away, Evelyn leaned in, sleeves rolled, grit beneath her nails. Nights after chores, she'd pore over dog-eared repair manuals and circuitry diagrams in the kitchen's dim lamplight, deciphering decades-old blueprints. She called salvage yards 2 counties out, bartered homemade bread for buckets of mismatched gears and weathered bearings, sorted through heaps of scrap to find anything that would fit the windmill's hidden bones. Her brother fretted aloud after supper that she'd break her back or the bank on a sentimental resurrection. Her nephews cracked wise at family gatherings. "Should we buy you a cape for your superhero windmill?" Outsiders riding by during stormy twilights could spot her figure clinging to the frame, wrench aloft, a stubborn outline against shifting clouds. Progress, when it came, moved slow and backwards as often as ahead. She replaced one blade, only for a sudden gust to rattle loose another gears she'd oiled and coaxed for days would jam on a hidden burr, sending her down the ladder muttering under breath. Wires rusted inside their sheaths, soldering points broke with a careless step, and the old pump wheezed like it had asthma. Evelyn taught herself to weld with a borrowed mask, burning through nights in the barn, flashes of blue dancing against her shadowed face. For every failure she made notes, sketched improvements, scrounged for parts at auctions, and called her mother's old friend for tips on balancing a shaft or getting grease into a sealed housing. Modern tweaks crept in, solar sensors, a custom fuse salvaged from an abandoned generator, and the windmill slowly became something new, a patchwork of old-world craft and present-tense defiance. Still, every setback echoed in her bones. She felt the weight of family worry and saw the sidelong grins of neighbors each time she climbed toward the stalled sky. But as the wind shifted over the valley and the tower's silhouette sharpened anew, Evelyn's steadiness outlasted every storm. Each failure became knowledge, every wound a stitch added to the windmill's growing promise. Carved one bolt, one long evening, one stubborn hope at a time. It happened on a wild spring afternoon, clouds rolling low and restless as the valley braced for another downpour. Evelyn stood below the windmill, jaw tight, hands aching with spent effort, when a gust finally caught the newly mended blades. For the first time in decades, the tower groaned and shivered, vanes turning faster and faster until rotten rust gave way to purpose. A tremor ran down the pipe as gears found their fit, and the old pump, coaxed to readiness, began to thrum. Suddenly, lights flickered on in the barn, soft at first, then steady, chasing shadows from the corners where mice once ruled. Water gushed up from the well, clear and cold, filling troughs and shining along the rows Evelyn had planted in hope word spread quick. Neighbors who'd only come to watch her fail stood by the fence in silent awe. Family bustled out, laughter and disbelief chasing away months of tension. For a moment, the only sound was wind in the veins, a song both new and impossibly old. Suddenly, what had been pointless scrap was the heart of the farm itself. Every skeptic's gaze caught between the turning blades and the woman who'd refused to quit when quitting seemed like the only reasonable thing to do. The windmill song didn't fade with the first burst of summer. It grew, weaving into the lifeblood of the farm and the town itself. Word of Evelyn's triumph rippled out, soft at first, just a story passed across the feed store countertop or whispered in church pews. Then neighbors began to visit, first with jokes, then with curious questions, and finally, with their own battered windmill vanes or snapped weather vanes tucked under their arms. Evelyn found herself guiding old friends and former doubters through the steps she'd learned: how to set a bearing straight, where to scavenge for blades, secrets of keeping a gearbox clean. The farm's bottom line brightened. Electricity bills shrank, garden rows stayed green even through dry spells, and nights under the barn roof glowed with an easy light once reserved for rare holidays. The kids next door brought school projects to the base of the tower, sketching its silhouette in science journals, while passing truckers stopped for photos. The windmill revived as a monument to second chances. Families began to ask for help with broken pumps, old grain augers, and creaking house fans, and Evelyn, patient as seed time, answered every call. The laughter that once dogged her footsteps turned to praise and stories of their own, quiet admissions that maybe there was more life left in the old machines. In a county known for letting the wind decide, Evelyn's stubborn trust in rust became a landmark, proof that grit and vision could do what hope alone could never finish. The wind has a way of finding what's left standing, and so too does hope, moving through the broken, the forgotten, the things everyone's certain only a fool would bother to save. Evelyn's windmill became more than a source of water or evening light. It reminded the whole valley that sometimes what we throw aside is exactly what keeps us going when everything else fails. In fields and families alike, the power we overlook for years waits quietly for someone patient, someone just stubborn enough to try again. The neighbors learned that resilience isn't just a matter of muscle or money, but of daring to see value in what others dismiss. Even a rusted tower, sighed over and ignored, can carry new life if met with vision and steady work. Evelyn liked to recall her grandfather's old words each time the blades spun. There's always a bit of wind left for those with enough faith to build for it. Sometimes salvaged dreams light up whole towns. Have you ever brought something back that everyone else called a lost cause? Maybe it was a windmill of your own, an old tractor, a field you turned green again, or even an idea that wouldn't let you quit. We'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below and let us know what you've restored and what you learned from the journey. Don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're on a family farm, in a small town, or halfway around the world, your lessons make this community stronger. Every reply reminds someone else that second chances aren't just for land and machines, but for people and dreams too. If Evelyn's story inspired you, or made you look twice at something rusty waiting in your own backyard, consider subscribing for more true tales of country stubbornness and surprise victories. You never know which forgotten hope might be waiting for you to give it wind and a reason to spin again.